This video is for anyone who is new to FootPrints Service Core version 12. It will primarily help those that are already familiar with version 11 and talk about some of the differences, although it will be useful to anyone who's new to 12. The major differences are navigating through the screen in the UI, and then also some new features. Let's first talk about navigation. Version 11 had the concept of being in a particular workspace at any one time. If at any time you wanted to get to another workspace, or for that matter, address book, CMDB, service catalog, etc., you had to go in the upper right-hand corner and switch from one workspace to the other. Version 12 is completely different. You always have access to everything that you have permission to see, all from one place. You can see here I have a list of all my incidents from my service desk workspace, as well as my tickets from my human resources workspace. I could also easily create things from many different workspaces of many different types. So I could create change requests, incidents, problems, service requests, human resources tickets, all from one place. In addition to having access to all my workspaces, I could also easily have access to everything in my knowledge base, CMDB, address book, etc. There's going to be no need for you to switch from one to the other. You always have access to them in these top consoles. There's also never going to be a need to have multiple windows open. Everything is within one of these consoles, and if you're within one of the consoles, for example, if you go to create a new incident, it's just going to open a new tab in that console. So you still have the ability to view many different searches, create new incidents, edit existing incidents, all in one place, without the overhead of having various pop-up windows everywhere. This same dynamic of always having access to everything that you have permission to see also plays itself on the administration side. So if you go to the administration tab, if you have permission, you're going to have access to modify all your workspaces, address books, knowledge bases, service portfolios, CMDBs, in a very similar way. Drilling into any of these are going to have very similar features as far as modifying fields, forms, rules, workflow, templates, etc. Instead of having multiple different admin screens and having to bounce back and forth, once again, it's all consolidated into one admin screen. Depending on your level of permissions, you may see more or less things here. I'm logged in as a system admin who has access to everything, but if I only had access to administer workspaces, for example, I wouldn't see many of these other tiles. You might hear the word container thrown around in a lot of documentation and throughout the product. A container is really just a separate repository for tracking some type of records. In version 11, Workspaces were the main repository that was available. In version 12, we're explicitly calling out address books, knowledge bases, service portfolios, and CMDBs, all as different types of repositories. You could have as many of these repositories as you want. Each instance of the repository is referred to as a container, and it's going to be configured in pretty much an identical way. Now that we've gone through some navigation, let's take a look at some new functionality. Let's say I want to configure my service desk workspace. I could just click on the link here. Another thing that is new to FootPrints 12 is you have the ability to have multiple types of records within a single workspace, or in any single container for that matter. In the past, anytime you wanted to track some new type of record, like incident, service request, problem, you had to create a completely new workspace to do that. Now you can see you have the ability to have incident, service requests, and problems, for example, within a single workspace. If you want to continue with the version 11 mode of having a different workspace for each, you can do that as well. Let's drill in and let me configure my incident. This is where you're probably going to spend most of your configuration time. So like I said before, all the containers and different types of records are going to have a similar dynamic. You're going to be able to modify their forms, their fields, rules, workflow, templates, and other things that you see here. Another thing that is new is the added flexibility with the forms. So, in the past, you had the ability to modify a single form, and then depending on who was accessing it, customer versus agent, depending on their role, you had to grant and take away different permissions so people would see different fields. Since the customer and the agent experience is completely separate, we've given you the ability to now create completely separate forms for them so you can tailor it to how they need to work. Let's take a look at modifying the agent web form. There are a few different ways you could add elements to the form. First, if there's already an existing field you created in the field designer, you have the ability to just drag that field onto the form. The most common way is probably going to be adding a new control to the form that does not yet map to a field, which you will create within that process. For example, I might want to add a new drop-down for operating system, and maybe I want to put it right below incident number, right above status. I could come over here and change the properties of the form control. For example, the label that's going to show above it. Now I've just changed the label on the form, but there is no corresponding field that's actually going to have this data saved within it. So I have to bound this form control to a field. If there's already an existing field, you could use it, but most likely you're going to click on this Create New Field option, which is going to then take you to the Field Designer page. I've quickly changed the name of my field. Now let me add some choices to the drop-down. Once I add the items, I could officially add them by clicking the Add Item button, and then save my field. We then want to navigate back to the form and make sure to save the form changes as well. The very last step before we see our changes in production is to publish all the changes that we just made. So anytime you make any change to any record within your container, in this case the workspace, you have to publish. So there's this Save and Publish button. This may take some time, but when it's done, you will get a success message at the bottom. If there are any problems, it would give you an error message and give you options for how to alleviate them. Now let's go back and see our changes, how they manifest themselves. So once again, I could click on Create Incident. My new form will pop up, and you can see my operating system field is there with the choices that I added. There are some other new features that you're also probably going to want to take a look at. If we go back to Modify Our Incident, we looked at forms, you have the ability to add fields. Next, you're probably going to want to look at rules. So this is analogous to escalations in the version 11 product, but it's much more powerful and flexible than that, and also encompasses a lot of our automation features. Workflow Process is a brand new feature where you can visually outline your workflow, determine what stages people can go to and from. And then we have quick templates as well as some other things which are similar to what we have in version 11. And lastly, another new feature you're going to want to look at is Service Analytics. If you click this link in the upper right hand corner, it's going to give you access to Service Analytics, which is where all the reporting in FootPrints 12 is done. Another area that I want to point you to, which is different in version 12, is user management. Let's first look at roles. So similar to other places, once again, we have access to all the roles in one place. So for each container, whether it's change management, CMDB, the service desk that I showed you before, by default we're going to create many different roles. This is very similar to version 11. Anytime you created a new workspace, we created several default roles for you. We really just extended the role concept, so now it applies to all containers, whether it's a CMDB, a workspace, an address book, etc. Something that's very new though is something that's a system role. So you can see here we have the role level. Most of these are the container roles, but by default, when you install the system, several system roles are automatically created. Although there are some global permissions that are available in the system role, the main point of the system role is to determine the role type, whether it's agent or customer. If it's an agent system role, that means it consumes a license. If it's a customer system role, that means it does not consume a license. Also, if it's a customer system role, that means you have to have a customer type role in every single container. If it's an agent system role, you can mix and match. Some containers you could be a customer, some containers you could be an agent. Now let's go create a new user and see how this applies. I could edit any one of my existing users, or just click on New in this case. The very first thing it's going to be asking for is your system role. So if it's a type agent, like specifically selecting agent, you're going to get a license type, fixed or concurrent. If it's a type customer, there's no need to have a license type. I took the time to fill out some of the pertinent information about the new fixed agent that we're creating. One thing to note, you're probably going to want to go into your own account and edit yourself and give yourself access to the CMDB mobile and change approver license. This way, you're going to have access to configure those things. By default, you're not granted access, so you're probably not going to see where the CMDB is, for example. So make sure to modify your own user account and add yourself here. Quickly scrolling down, now we have to grant this person access to whatever containers and workspaces that we want. Let's keep it simple and only give them access to the service desk. Now, line by line, we're asked to give a particular role for that container. Let's also give them the agent container role. So just a quick recap. Every user is going to have one and only one system role. That determines whether they take up a license or not, and also some system-wide settings. And each container that you give them access to, you're going to have to give them a role for that container. This is no different than in version 11, how you had to give a role per workspace. We're just extending it to knowledge bases, CMDBs, address books, etc. Okay, let me save my new user. Now let's go back to roles and make sure that that role has permission to actually do something in that container. So since this roles page lists every single role from every single container, because I'm a system admin and have access to everything, it could get quite cumbersome. We give you an easy way to navigate and narrow down what you're looking at though. You have the ability to filter on any one of these columns. So I just typed in the word service here, and it's only showing me roles that belong to containers that have the word service. So in my case, the one's in the service desk, and we happen to have something else called service portfolio. So I added that user with the agent role in the service desk. Let's take a look at the roles settings. By default, they don't have access to anything. So even if you logged in as a user, you wouldn't be able to do anything. Let's make sure they have access to at least the incident records. Once you do that, you could then further drill down and see whether they have view, create, edit, delete permissions, as well as fields and some other permissions that you're used to in version 11 as well. Okay, that was a quick overview of getting you acclimated to the new UI and how to navigate and configure the system. Please watch our other videos, which are going to go into a lot more detail on each one of these topics that I've covered today. Thank you.